On February 4th, 1945, the Allied powers of the United States, Soviet Union, and Great Britain met in the city of Yalta in the Ukrainian part of the Soviet Union to discuss the distribution of Germany after the war. It was decided that Germany, and its capital Berlin, would be split into 4 occupied zones, each zone going to one of the main Allied powers, which were the United States, Britain, the USSR, and then France getting a 4th occupied zone, made up by that of the United States and Great Britain. Fast forward to the 7th of May. Germany had surrendered unconditionally to the Allies. The Allies, now focused on the war with Japan, met on July 17th, 1945, in Potsdam, Berlin, to finally discuss the fate of post-war Germany and come to a consensus on what to do about Japan. The United States tried to compromise with Japan by setting up the Potsdam Declaration, demanding their unconditional surrender or Japan would face prompt and utter destruction. After having their ultimatum rejected by Japan on August 6th and August 9th, the United States dropped atomic bombs on the cities of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This led to a swift Japanese surrender on August 15th, 1945. World War II was officially over. The Allies then proceeded to split up Germany. Although Berlin was enclosed in Soviet territory, it was split into 4 sectors. West Berlin became a de facto West German exclave. Primarily, there was no conflict with East and West Berlin being split. However, both sides began to want different things. East Berlin, being led by the Soviet Union, wanted to spread communism and wanted the entirety of Berlin to unite under communist rule. West Berlin, led by the United States, wanted to work on reuniting Germany through a democratic government and halt the spread of communism. This helped lead to an icy period of tension between the two, called the Cold War. On January 1st, 1947, the United States and Great Britain combined their quadrants into one called Bisonia, and the French later planned to join. On the 23rd of June, 1948, the West introduced a new form of currency called the Deutschmark. This upset the Soviets as they feared this new form of currency would devalue their already inflated form of currency, the Reichsmarks. The Soviet Union was fed up with West Berlin's capitalism and plans of reunification. The day after, they began a barricade in hopes that they could push the United States, France, and Great Britain out of Berlin. In June of 1948, all highways, railroads, and canals from Western-occupied Germany to Western-occupied Berlin were closed off. The United States, France, and Great Britain began to airlift resources to West Berliners for more than a year. This became known as the Berlin Airlift. These Allied supply planes made nearly 300,000 flights in total and supplied roughly 2.3 million tons of cargo to West Berlin. On May 12, 1949, realizing their plan had failed, the Soviet Union reopened the roads, canals, and airways. After this event, Germany divided into 2 nations. West Germany became the Federal Republic of Germany, and East Germany became the German Democratic Republic. Eastern Berlin was a socialist state, and the Soviet Union did not want Westerners crossing into East Berlin. Unfortunately for the Soviets, many East Berliners were not happy under the communist rule and wanted to escape and cross the border to live a better life in West Germany. On the night of August 12, 1961, upwards of 2,400 East Germans fled the country. This was the largest number of defectors in a single day and the last straw for the German Democratic Republic. Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev gave the government of East Berlin permission to block off the border and prevent people from leaving. On the morning of August 13, 1961, barbed wire was put up between East and West Berlin and was called, by the East government, the Anti-Fascist Protection Wall. It came as a total shocker as it appeared seemingly overnight, and surprised people in both East and West Berlin. The wall's proposed purpose was to keep West Berliners out of the socialist state of East Berlin, but the wall also stopped East Berliners from going to West Berlin. Over time, the barbed wire turned into a full-fledged 12-foot-tall and 4-foot-wide concrete wall with a pipe on top that was nearly impossible to cross. It became known as the Berlin Wall and was an ideological, political, and physical barrier through Germany that needed to be broken. Prior to the Berlin Wall being built, traveling from east to west was complicated but not impossible. After the construction of the wall, citizens of East Berlin and the German Democratic Republic were not allowed to cross the wall, and those who could, which included some West Berliners and high-ranking officials, had to go through one of 12, initially 3 checkpoints. The 3 initial checkpoints were called Checkpoint Alpha, Checkpoint Bravo, and Checkpoint Charlie. On the East German side of the wall, there was an area called the Death Strip that went to all means necessary to stop people from crossing the wall. The Death Strip contained watchtowers, guard dogs, floodlights, and tripwire machine guns. Upwards of 80 people died trying to cross the wall. Escapees used various methods. The majority crossed on foot, but some went to lengths such as by hot air balloon or jumping out of their windows. Around 5,000 people, including border guards, successfully crossed the Berlin Wall. Families and friends were separated by the wall, and it caused great suffering for them. Mothers separated from their children, husbands from their wives, grandparents from their grandchildren, and West Berliners from East Berliners. On the 26th of June, 1963, President John F. Kennedy gave a speech in which he famously stated, "Ich bin ein Berliner," in which he meant to say, "I am a Berliner," but he actually said, "I am a jelly donut." Regardless of his mispronunciation, in this speech, Kennedy reaffirmed the United States' support for West Germany and showed, in fact, that they did have allies. Despite many protests, the Berlin Wall remained. In 1985, when his two previous successors died, Mikhail Gorbachev was elected General Secretary of the Communist Party. On June 12, 1987, Ronald Reagan visited West Berlin for the 750th celebration. In Reagan's speech, he went so far as to insist that Mikhail Gorbachev, the General Secretary of the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, tear down this wall. This provided even more hope to the Germans. East Germans then began to stage peaceful protests. On October 9, 1989, the residents of Leipzig, Germany, held up a banner with the words, "We're the people," and sparked peaceful protests. The people in Leipzig were out of Berlin and, in turn, were more willing to take risks than those inside Berlin. Between 70,000 and 100,000 peaceful protesters sparked protests for freedom. Along with this, Hungary lifted travel restrictions on Austria, which allowed thousands of East Germans to flee safely to the West. This inspired East Germans to leave their country. As the Cold War began to thaw, the wall began to fall. On November 9, 1989, the East German government announced that soon East German citizens would be allowed to visit West Berlin and could now also apply for travel visas. Although this was not the direct message that communist leaders wanted to give, they were trying to appease the people, and the man who delivered the message ended up relaying a miscommunication to the people of East Berlin. Hearing this news, along with Hungary lifting travel restrictions, led to thousands of East Berliners beginning to crowd around the wall. They had enough and were desperate for freedom. Initially, the border guards allowed people to cross after being checked. Later that night, there were so many people trying to get through that the border guards eventually gave in and opened the gates, allowing the masses to pass. Many citizens began to physically destroy the wall, and that weekend, more than 2 million citizens went from East Berlin to West Berlin to celebrate the breaking of a huge political and ideological barrier. Many enumerate the fall of the wall as the end of the Cold War. On October 3, 1990, East and West Germany were reunified and became one state. On December 3, 1991, United States President George Bush and Mikhail Gorbachev released a statement that the Cold War was coming to a close. Then, on the 26th of December 1991, the Soviet Union dissolved. For 10,316 days, the Berlin Wall was a symbol for division, but the fall of the wall has a legacy that will live on forever. The breaking of the Berlin Barrier was the first step in reunifying Germany. While to some there may still be many steps needed to reunify East and West Germany, the victory that was found on November 9, 1989, was one of great euphoria for the Germans and a majority of the world. Parts of the wall are still up today for people to go and see and reflect on the legacy of this broken barrier.